Hello lovely viewers and welcome to Learn with JGU. Today in this lesson, we shall analyze the African poem, An African Thunderstorm. This is a poem written by David Rubadiri, a renowned poet from Malawi. I entreat you to like this video and subscribe to my channel so that you are notified anytime a new video is uploaded. Okay, let's begin. Now, the way I would want us to begin the analysis of this poem is by letting you understand that the meaning of this poem can be looked at from two perspectives. One, that the poem is all about colonization and the effects it has had on the African continent. And two, that it is about the vulnerability of man in the face of nature. So then I'm going to read through the entire poem and then we can start the stanza by stanza analysis. An African Thunderstorm. From the west, clouds come hurrying with the wind, turning sharply here and there, like a plague of locusts, whirling, tossing up things on its tail, like a madman chasing nothing. Pregnant clouds ride stately on its back, gathering to perch on hills, like sinister dark wings. The wind whistles by, and trees bend to let it pass. In the village, screams of delighted children toss and turn in the din of the whirling wind. Women, babies clinging on their backs, dart about in and out madly. The wind whistles by, while trees bend to let us pass. Clothes wave like tattered flags, flying off to expose dangling breasts. As jagged blinding flashes rumble, tremble and crack amidst the smell of fired smoke and the pelting march of the storm. What do we have in the first stanza? The poet says, from the west, clouds come hurrying with the wind, turning sharply, here and there like a plague of locusts, whirling, tossing up things on its tail, like a madman chasing nothing. From the west, clouds come hurrying with the wind. Clouds are described by the poet as coming from the west. The west is a symbol for colonization. In geopolitical terms, the west, anytime mentioned, refers to countries in the Western world such as the United States, France, Germany, and other European countries who have had a history of colonization with Africa. The title, An African Thunderstorm, therefore is an allegory for colonization, slavery, social unrest, and the discrimination experienced by most African people. In literal terms, the poet uses the term west to refer to the winds from the west that ushers rainfall in Africa. From this direction, that is the west, clouds come hurrying with the wind. We observe in the second line of the poem that clouds are being personified. There's personification in clouds hurrying with the wind. It is as though the clouds have the human quality and emotion to hurry up in response to a situation. We can make a claim that clouds here is a symbol for the colonialists who are on their way for a mission. These clouds, according to the poet, are turning sharply here and there. The personification of clouds in line 2 extends to line 3 when the clouds are said to be turning sharply. The act of turning is a human or animate action that is given to the clouds. This line reinforces the speed and swiftness of the clouds as they move. These clouds turn sharply here and there. Here and there gives us an image of multi-colonization. That is, it is not only Africans that are being colonized by the clouds or the West. Other countries or continents are facing a similar challenge. The fact that the clouds move from one country to another sharply demonstrates the intelligence and smartness of the colonizers in carrying out such a destructive movement in multiple places. Like a plague of locusts whirling. In line 5, there is a simile where the clouds are compared to a plague of locusts that are whirling. This line is a biblical allusion. It alludes to the biblical plague of Egypt, where God sent a swarm of locusts to destroy the crops of Egypt in a bid to force Pharaoh, the king, to free the Israelites from bondage. A plague is like a disease, a torment, or a curse. Comparing clouds to a plague only goes on to reiterate the destructive nature of the clouds. It draws an image of Africans being the victim of this destruction, pain, and sense of doom they are about to experience in the form of colonization. So like a plague of locusts, the clouds come whirling and tossing up things on its tail. Whirling is an onomatopoeia imitating the sounds made by the moving wind. As the wind whirls, it tosses up things on its tail. This portrays an image of confusion that the moving clouds bring to the people about to experience the storm. Usually before the event of rainfall, when the wind whirls, it makes sounds while moving haphazardly, carrying, spinning, and tossing up any object that comes its way. The objects in this context may be the houses of the people, their clothes, their belongings, or the lives of the people themselves. Tossing up turns on its tail exemplifies the metaphor, comparing the clouds to an animal with a tail. Like a madman chasing nothing. The last line of the first stanza is a simile, comparing the clouds to a madman chasing nothing. Why does the poet compare the clouds to a madman? He does so probably to demonstrate the insanity of the actions of the clouds. Remember that the clouds are a symbol for the colonialists and their way of doing things, including their unfair trade between themselves and Africans, the slavery of the Africans, the assaults of Africans in various forms. A lot of dehumanizing acts portrayed by the colonialists made them look like aimless mad people who didn't really reason before bringing the suffering upon the people. Now on to the second stanza. We have pregnant clouds ride stately on its back, gathering to perch on hills like sinister dark wings. The wind whistles by, and trees bend to let it pass. Pregnant clouds ride stately on its back. Pregnant clouds here is a personification. The clouds are personified as having the human and female trait of being pregnant. What at all are the clouds pregnant with? They are pregnant with rainwater, ready to burst into rainfall. Metaphorically, pregnant clouds is a symbol for danger, doom, and fear. That the clouds are pregnant with some sense of danger, waiting for the right time to unleash it onto its victims. Compare a bright sunny day to a changing and darkening atmosphere due to cloud formation. You realize that the latter brings uneasiness among the people because they would have to prepare themselves either by protecting properties from getting wet or carried away, or by aborting certain operations in anticipation for the rain. The pregnant clouds are riding stately on its back. The personification proceeds to the second line of the second stanza, where the pregnant clouds are dignified like kings, riding horses. The movement of clouds in a kingly fashion paints a picture of the clouds slowing down in terms of speed. Remember in stanza 1, we had words like hurrying, sharply, whirling, and chasing, all connoting some sense of urgency, hence the haphazard movement of the clouds. Also, the absence of punctuation marks in the first stanza rings in the mind that there were no pauses as the clouds move. They moved with the speed of locusts and like madmen here and there. In stanza 2, however, the movement of clouds is slowed by the kingly status acquired by the clouds as it approaches the people. Pregnant clouds riding stately. Stately might be used here by the poet as a pun to demonstrate the movement of clouds from one place to another, as in from one state to another state. Gathering to perch on hills like sinister dark wings. Another personification here. The clouds are gathering like humans to settle in a place of its choice. It does this like sinister dark wings, perching on hills. Like sinister dark wings is a simile comparing the dark and pregnant clouds to an evil force, a fearful one of course, probably the angel of death, which is resting on the hilltop while planning its execution of destruction. The wind whistles by, and trees bend to let it pass. The last two lines are replete with personification, as the wind whistles and trees bend like humans to allow the proud and royal clouds to move. For the fear of destruction, the trees bend, else they will be executed by the sharp wings of the clouds. The last two lines demonstrate the relationship between the elements of nature, where some forces of nature are able to control and subdue others. Nature is superior, but will always and most likely face the resistance of man in an attempt to disrupt the normal flow of events. In the village, screams of delighted children toss and turn in the din of the whirling wind. Women, babies clinging on their backs, dart about in and out, madly. The wind whistles by, while trees bend to let us pass. In the third stanza, the poet describes the reaction of both children and adults to the impending storm. He says that in the village we hear screams of delighted children. By this, we are greeted with the image of playful and cheerful children as the storm prepares to announce its presence. Generally, the reaction of children to the storm is a happy one and a joyful one. But then there is some element of paradox in screams of delighted children, because by screams, the poet points out that the children are crying loudly. However, these same children are happy and delighted in anticipation for the storm. The screams of these children toss and turn in the din of the whirling wind. What happens when the storm begins to take effect? The screams of children get lost in the whirling wind. It could be that the children were initially happy to welcome the storm, but upon seeing the severity and anger of the wind in tossing up and turning tents, their delight suddenly changed to screams, crying for help probably, but their screams cannot be heard by anyone because the whirling wind soaks them up. How do the adults react to the impending storm? They dart about in and out madly. That's how they react. The babies as well are seriously clinging on the backs of their mothers, probably because they can feel the anxiety from their mothers as they move in confusion and in preparation for the impending storm. Remember in the first stanza, it was the clouds that was described by the poet as moving like madmen. In stanza 3, the madness has been transmitted onto the adults as they dart about madly and in confusion in a bid to set things right before the destruction of the storm sets in. This action of women describes exactly the effects of colonization on the African people. The wind whistles by, while trees bend to let us pass. When the trees whistle this time, it is not the clouds that the trees bend to allow them move, but then it is the people themselves that move in the bending position of the trees. Clothes wave like tattered flags flying off to expose dangling breasts, as jagged blinding flashes rumble, tremble, and crack amidst the smell of fired smoke and the pelting march of the storm. As the wind whirls, clothes wave like tattered flags. This is a simile, but also a personification of clothes waving. The clothes of women are compared to tattered flags. Flags here is a metonymy, referring or symbolizing a nation. This implies the effects of colonization on the nation as its flags is being ripped apart. The tattered flags are said to be flying off, indicating a loss of cultural and national identity as the storm exerts its absolute force on the people. To expose dangling breasts is another scenario capturing the ills of colonization. The exposure of dangling breasts is indicative of sexual assault suffered by most women during the era of colonization. It also brings to bear the vulnerability of African people, most especially women, during the advent of the storm. The poem continues, as jagged blinding flashes rumble, tremble, and crack amidst the smell of fired smoke. Here, the storm is preceded by flashes of lightning, very sharp ones of course, which are jagged. That is to say that they appear in a zigzag form, accompanied by the rumbling and trembling sounds of thunder. Rumble and tremble are onomatopoeias, imitating the sounds of thunder. These sounds connote the voices and ideas of the colonialists as they impose their will on their victims to accept and obey them. They do that with fear and terror amidst the smell of fired smoke. Fired smoke here may mean the smoke that comes out after pulling the trigger of a gun. It may also mean the smell of any source of fire that is put out by the wind. Either ways, the smell of fired smoke does not connote a comfortable event. It depicts the death of people, fear of movement, fear of practicing one's own religion, and hungry children who can't find fire to prepare food because of the storm's presence, and the pelting march of the storm. A thunderstorm literally is a violent rain that sets itself up for mass destruction. Pelting march may be used by the poet to compare the storm to a group of soldiers who marched during the colonial era, and who were tasked to enforce the European ideas using force and violence. The pelting march of a storm therefore connotes war to establish a political change, and that will be done using pure violence.